Welcome to another show of a Writer's Conspiracy Project. I am Robert Macosio, and tonight's show is going to be a writing lesson. Okay, now last week we discussed a system of writing in draft. The system of writing in draft, basically what we had finalized was the purpose of writing in draft. First draft is always get your story down from beginning to end. Then you go back and you build your characters in the second draft, and in the third draft you start to tie up all the loose ends. If you have to go anywhere beyond that in drafts, you might have to do research for subjects that are on the geographical information or historical information or technical information. If you're writing a book that requires you to go into certain things, spiritual, metaphysical, medical, even into special things like computers and technique and other things. You want your book to sound as realistic as you possibly can, and you really only need to use the jargon, the trade jargon, rather than going into giving the details on how certain things work and the principles behind that, unless, of course, you're writing a technical manuscript. Basically, we have different kinds of writing, uses different kinds of techniques to entice the reader to read further, because each page that you write has the purpose of taking the writer and making them want to read the second or third page and the next chapter and the chapter after that and the chapter after that. If anywhere's in the book, I could tell you from my own reading experience, if I read a book and I go through the first three chapters of that book and it doesn't hook me, I'll put it down, and maybe a week later I'll pick it up and I'll try to go again at it. And if it doesn't get me by the third or fourth chapter, it looks good on my shelf. In one of my previous shows, I had discussed about the 5 C's of writing, which was conspiracy, conflict, collusion, and challenge, and I can't think of the other one. But anyway, it was basically a personal method that I use, a personal technique that I have to generate enough action and enough interest in the books that I write, because that's just the way that I developed it, and it works for me. When we were doing that show, we came up with I was trying to give you an idea of how to come up with an idea for a chapter or a book or a character by using real life situations, such as, we had a situation that I had prescribed to you that was basically a scenario using a situation between a former president and a current president, which really would make a really good, I would say, an espionage or some kind of a controversy or some type of a conspiracy. That was the 5th C, was conspiracy. Was the conspiracy, with this conspiracy type of a book, you as a writer have a lot of leeway to make it work. And one of the things that I was trying to tell the aspiring writer was how exactly you can go about, and gave you different ideas of what could possibly be written in ways that you would make the story interesting. So what I did was, when I got home, I took my idea and I sat there and this is what I wrote. This would be chapter 1, or it could be a prelude. Some books I like to use preludes in. Other books I like to just go right into the meat of it. So this would be a possible first chapter using the scenario that I was given. Okay, and it starts off with, from a distance, a tall, slender, well-dressed diplomat exits his limousine. He is greeted as he approaches the steps of the court where he will deliver his speech. He has taken an obscured road to his successful path, guided by shadows and subversive intent. He stops, turns to the gathering crowd, his following, dedicated, submissive, and willing to believe anything he says without question. What I'm doing here is I'm setting up a perspective for the reader to enter into the story with an action, because action is always something that'll get somebody interested enough to read to the next chapter. Devoted to the ideal, the inner circle is amazed at the willingness of the herd to follow. This is giving you an idea that there is somebody beyond this person, and they are keeping a close eye on what he's doing. The quest is a farce of intellectual insinuation, of utopist delusion, merely an idea without a plan, maybe more, a game played by an elite bunch. The ante is up, and the cards have been dealt. This is telling you it's a plan that's already been devised. It's not something that just happened overnight. Somebody's been planning this for years and years and years. And it's just gotten to the point to where it's hit the spotlight and everybody's sitting there in awe. And even the people who are behind this thing can't believe their plan is going as well as it is. But there are other perspectives to this. And now you introduce that other perspective. From a rooftop, 1,000 yards of clear view, the target takes his place at the platform. A perfect shot to the head will end his collusion and drop the usurper. The shooter has his escape planned, and through his scope, he scans the security force. 6 months earlier, this opportunity would have been impossible, but now his vulnerability deepens with every day that passes, because he is no longer in the protective eye of the of his security. Has been lessened because he's no longer the head executive of the most powerful nation in the world. Okay, arrogant, the speaker greets the crowd, his mortality but moments away as the shooter takes careful aim. The wind blows gentle from the east, and the shooter adjusts. His finger steady takes the trigger. Old friends in alliance of deadly deeds of the past. Shoot. What these two paragraphs here is doing is baiting the reader. That's the whole purpose of it. Because just because I'm giving you the idea that this usurper was taken care of, doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going to happen. Because that is the purpose of writing something in a way that is taking the reader and making them believe that something is going to happen. And this is the way it's going to happen. But you're the writer, and you're supposed to be the manipulator of the story, because that's what you do as a writer. You're a manipulator. You're entertaining the writer by taking his intellectual and taking it and twisting it, because for some reason people like that. They like when somebody plays with their mind, where they can sit there and they can go, I never saw it coming. Then I start with the next line, and it goes 3 months earlier. So I'm using a flashback technique here. The newly elected president meets with his cabinet in the Oval Office. The head of his security opens the door and enters and the director of secret operations enters the room. Intelligence gathered on the usurper is placed in the hands of the president that reviews the information. This is serious, and to date the most serious decision he would have to make. If he does nothing, the usurper undermines the efforts of his office overseas as well as domestically, and this cannot go without challenge. The president looks up from the document folders. What is the recommendation? Protocol 6, Mr. President. Are you certain? Foreign relations have been compromised. As the intelligence report states, the former president has collaborated with heads of state and is a threat to the security of this country. What about retribution from the public? In comparison, this is the lesser of two evils, Mr. President. At least domestically, we have a means of controlling the retaliation. Now, I don't go into detail of who's speaking and who's going on. You know when the president's speaking, and you get an idea that his aides are the ones that are doing, filling in the blanks. You're just moving your story along. You don't want to get into too much detail. And the president would respond to the last sentence as, you mean martial law? And his aide would say, well, it's better than all-out war, because they're trying to justify this to the new president, because as it said, this is a very important decision, and the president may not have any experience with politics before. Running the government is different than running a business, because you have powers that the average businessman doesn't really have, or is not supposed to have anyway. There has to be some other way. The president leans back in his chair. This is not the direction he expected his administration to go. There isn't any time, sir. Should I make the phone call? Leaning back in his chair, the president gives careful thought. No time in the history of this country has a former president ever attempted a coup. This had to be handled carefully, and the question stands, was Protocol 6 an accepted solution? His face grim as the realization of power of his office lands upon his shoulders with heavy burden, and he looks back to his security officers. Make the call. The director picks up a secured line and dials a number. Invoke Protocol 6 and hangs up. It is done. As the president stands, he turns to look out the window with the Washington Monument in the distance. Men will die because of this. Things have been out of hand for a long time. This is now drawing you a mood of the public. It is no longer the president. It is now, this is the present and current day feel of what's going on. Things have been out of hand for a long time. A deception being perpetrated beyond the obvious. Something lurking in the shadows. Its present is unknown, but its identity, its president is known, but its identity is not yet revealed. Everybody knows there's something going on here, But conspiracy is not something that's new to any system of government. It's not new to any part of operating a country, even within running a corporation. There are struggles for power. It doesn't matter what you're at. Conflict is part of our human nature, and conflict is things that we like to read about, because anything else, well, it depends on your taste. It's kind of boring. Some people like controversy. They like it when there's conflict, because otherwise it's pretty boring. So you have people who lead very simple, very quiet lives. When they pick up a book, they're looking to live another lifestyle. They're looking to get into a different main frame of mind, so that this way their imagination takes them to places, and that is the appetite that you are trying to appease. Okay? So the human nature can feel it upon the air, repelled by the toxic insinuation that everything we are is invalid. Our values, our principles, ethics, and ideals, void and null whether we like it or not. A conquest by intellectual means where all resistance is eliminated, one deception after another. That is how the battle is being fought. The battle is not being fought with bullets. The battle is being fought intellectually with ideals. You have one ideal in conflict of another ideal, and that is basically what is happening. Yet others submit without question, absorbed in the core of revolution in every state of consciousness and physical being. Soldiers without a cause, set on an ideal, to the rhythmic anarchist in perpetual acts of violence for the one, on behalf of the all. The danger of clan influence by party agenda decided by the few in charge that think for the other guys, think for the others, but not always for their best interest. All is for the advancement of the party, the path bogged down by the foggy mist, the means of any way, by all means to reach the goal of an obscured nature. Rule of the mob, using the tools of chaos for the purpose of installing an arbitrary system as old as recorded history. It's not something that's new. There's been conspiracies going all the way back, probably to way before the Greeks. There's always been a power struggle between people, between groups, between ideas and intellect, and from these conflicting ideals, we actually come to the system of government that we have today. Is it a perfect system? It is for me, but it's not a perfect system for everybody. And it's not a perfect system. It has a lot of things that have to be repaired. But sometimes you get these groups of people who think that it's their way or no way, or the ideal is appealing to them because they think that they're right. And then you have this big confrontation. We go through this every 30, 40 years in our system alone. The advantage of our system is that we actually have a flexibility to be able to alter and adjust as we go along. And we're in one of those situations where we have to alter and adjust. And we've been altering and adjusting for the last 30, 40 years, and we've come to an impasse to where the usurper is on the minds as he gives his all, believing he is the chosen one. Who could stand against his malice and contempt, against the establishment that in their very law deemed slavery constitutional? Because that is what the issue is here. That retains suffrage for male to rule, no matter that these acts have been long delivered, only that they were at one time, is all the argument necessary to diminish the document intended to create a free and equal society. So basically, they really have no argument at all, because a lot of the things have been progressing as we've been going, and it's all a lie, and every lie that passes from the usurper's lips is justified to his herd of dedicated followers. The gathering of 20 watches from the shadow. Now, this is introducing a group. It's called the Gathering of 20. You don't know who they are because they haven't been identified. Their identity hasn't been revealed. But we know somebody is behind them. Seated in a great hall, impressed by the usurper's arrogance, all these years of preparation and guidance is paying off. The herd trails behind, thinking that he is their savior, looking at them through themselves willfully before speeding cars, yes, dedicated to havoc, burning down structures. The banks of capitalists must be destroyed. Wealth is the enemy, individualism is the disease, National Socialism is the cure. Now is the time, here is the place. It is nothing new. It has happened before. It is an old plan that has worked many times, and each cycle has honed itself closer to perfection. The advancement of technology and social media, or even those of patriotic intent, spread the seed of destruction. Divide and conquer. Propagandists that plant deceptive reports to agitate the sheep and are getting paid by the click. A job and nothing more. The sale of hysteria becomes the means of profit, and the truth becomes an obscured afterthought of delusional endeavor by a media that thrives not upon accuracy, but upon sensationalist appetites of the misinformed. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm setting up a lot of different storylines within the storyline. You have the storyline that is going to be revealed about the Gathering of 20. You got the storyline that is going to be revealed about the main media and the deceptions that may not necessarily be part of the conspiracy, but the people who are behind these things have their own agenda. And usually the agenda behind any media is to make sales. It's why we write books. We want to make sales. Why we promote controversy in our books is because we want to make sales. You want to entertain the reader. The problem with the news media is that we don't read the newspaper to be entertained. We read the news to get information that is going to help us live our daily lives. Or, I mean, if we want to read entertainment, we open up to the entertainment center, read about a movie because we want to go out and we want to see this movie. Or read about a book because we're over here looking for something to do in our spare time. The news is not supposed to be entertainment. It's supposed to be boring. It's supposed to be about fact and accuracy. But so much for that. I mean, it was a great profession at one time, but it is no longer a profession. It's I can't curse here. So anyway, then you have other things. You have another storyline that is that has regards to maybe the shooter and the president, and other regards to the aides and that run the president. Because as much as powerful as the presidency of the United States goes, or president of any nation, is the he doesn't run everything. He has advisors. He's got people back there that have contacts in the public. A great show to watch would be The West Wing. West Wing was a good show, and that is pretty accurate on how things are run. I think it was dramatized a little bit, but the president might make the final decisions, but all of the information is placed before him. He doesn't read all of the documents. All he gets is the briefing on the documents, and that's pretty much how the government goes. I'm on a council for the borough of Hanover, and we like to read a lot of the things, but there's a lot of things that are basically handed to us that are briefs of what everything is, because there's no reason for us to read all of the legal documents, because we don't have law degrees. What do we know about it? We just basically get the information, and we try to get feelers out there from the community, but a lot of times the community doesn't really participate. Not until you run over their foot. When there's one of the things that you learn about when you're inside of the government, is that you pretty much don't hear anything from the public until you do something wrong. And when you do something wrong, and the public comes to your meeting, and there's 150 people in an auditorium, in a space that you're not supposed to have more than 60 people, you messed up. And you better listen to what's going on, otherwise, you're going to get a lot of bad phone calls. But I always welcome people to say something, either against or for, especially things that I do, because it's a sort of like a temperature gauge that if you don't hear anything from the public, you must be doing something right. You must be doing your job right, because the only time that you hear from the public is when you ran over their foot with your car. Now, all of this information and everything up until this point is basically, the first couple of paragraphs was to bait the reader into thinking something. You want them to think this is going to happen. You want them to think the usurper was taken care of. The second part was setting the mood of giving you, the reader, an idea of what are all the facts that are happening around there. There's a lot happening. There are private groups that you're going to learn about as the chapters take you deeper into the story. But I am not I got a lot of imagination, okay? So I'm going to take you, okay, and at that point, you're going to get to, now I'm going to set you to the storyline, okay? This is the storyline that's going to carry all of these different storylines. This is going to be your main storyline that is going to run the whole story. Everything else, all of the reactions of the president, the reactions of the usurper, the actions of the groups that are involved, and the public opinion, especially the media, are all going to be the intertwining storylines. But this is going to be your main line. It starts off, nature has its own plan, her own agenda, and she will prevail. Her plan is genetically implanted into the human nature we know as chance. Nature breeds the cure to all ailments, even those created by her greatest adversary, mankind. The year is 1986, and the story begins. Now, why do I choose 1986? Well, it's a political story about a former president trying to coup the newly elected president of the United States. Now, what happened in 1986? Well, all you young whippersnappers are scratching your head going like, I don't know. Well, you see, in 1986, we had the recommemoration of the Statue of Liberty in New York City, which I was at. And I can tell you from that experience of being on this small little island called Manhattan with 11 billion people who was kind of crammed into this little island for 3 days, because if you didn't get onto Manhattan Island the day prior to the commemoration, you wasn't on the island, because they closed off every tunnel and every bridge into the city. No one was coming into the city, no one was going out of the city, because they expected something to happen. So, here I was in New York City, couldn't get a hotel room, had plenty of money in my pocket, couldn't get into a hotel room because everything was booked up. So I slept in my truck. And let me tell you, I seen a lot of things happen that night, those 3 days in that truck. And I wandered the city. Fortunately, I was from the city, so I knew what places to stay away from and what places to go to. Now, here I am. I have money in my pocket, which is not a good thing to be in New York. I have no place to secure myself or anything. My truck did get broken into, but in New York City, a pickup truck is a very rare object, and they couldn't figure out how to get behind my seat where all my camera equipment and everything was. It was a simple lever. You pull it up and lean the seat forward. But they couldn't figure that out, and everything was bulky and couldn't get up from behind the seat. But anyway, I'd say about maybe a year or two ago, in between writing some of my novels and having some downtime and coming up with an idea about something, I wrote a story about Purple Footprints. Now, the story was called Purple Footprints because as I was walking through the city, there was these purple footprints. Somebody had actually gone around with probably a stick with a stamp and a little can of paint and went over there and was putting purple footprints on the ground. And one day I decided I was going to follow those purple footprints because I was bored. I wanted to see where they were going to go. And what they were doing was they were leading from one bar to another bar, to a restaurant, to another bar, to a restaurant, to a theater. And they were going around to all of these different places in New York. And I started going to some of these clubs. And it took me to some really bizarre places. So my idea about this was, when I wrote it down, was to write a book, and each place that I went to took me deeper down the rabbit hole. And that's what this book is going to develop into, is I'm going to take the reader down the rabbit hole. And these places are going to develop and take me, or the character at that point, because I'm writing about a fictional character, is going to take that character and is going to lead him down a path that is eventually going to lead him back to the beginning of the book. and how his relationship is to the beginning of the book. And what that's going to do is it's going to form a cycle. And that's how I write my stories. I write in a cycle, and each cycle comes to a climax and ends. And each cycle comes to a climax and ends. So my chapters are written in cycles. And those cycles have inner cycles, and it goes all the ways to until you get to the final chapter of the book, and all of the loose ends are tied off, and you're sitting there going like, wow. And that's the way it's supposed to end. It's supposed to bring you to a conclusion. So you, by the time you get to the end of the book, all of the situations that was created in this first chapter are all concluding, and each inner story has come to a conclusion, to the point to where all of those conclusions all bring you to the same end, the climax of the entire story. Well, the climax could be in the middle, the climax could be at the end too. But all of the questions that arose throughout the entire book by the reader has now been answered. And hopefully the writer, the person who reads the book, actually thinks that this was a great book. And sometimes they'll put it down, and maybe a month or two later they'll pick it up again and read it again, and they'll find things in that book that they didn't quite catch the first time, and they'll read things and they'll find out that the story was even deeper than they thought it was the first time. And that is something that I do with a lot of my books. Sometimes there's a story in there you don't put in its place until you get to the second book, because I have these chapters out. Okay, here for instance, this is Balatar. This is the first book on the series, and what it's about is it's about secret organization, it's about conspiracy, it's about controversy, and it starts with a prelude, and it starts with Balatar, and it'll start with this is the prelude, it's not the first chapter. In a forgotten tongue from the ancient book of the dead, the old chief told his story. His words drew images upon the young boy's mind sitting across the open pit fire. Through the words of this forgotten tongue were strange to the young boy. Though the words of this forgotten tongue were strange to the young boy, he listens and he understands as their minds meet on a plane of time and space. Here, the world of the ancient fathers, joined with the new, forming a common bond that breaches the significance of words. That is the first paragraph. What that tells you right off the bat, that it is going to be a story that is being told by someone to this young boy. Now, it goes a little bit deeper into that. Again, glowing embers of fire spirits dance upon the cave's blackness as the old chief stirs the fire with his stick. His voice, strained by age, spoke the forgotten words of the ancients, and in a gentle tone the story begins. And this is basically setting the reader up with images. If you can see this happening in your mind, you know that this is going to be something that is going to be very deep. And the story, the chief's words are deliberate in their recollection. Okay, this is his story. This is what I'm not telling the story. The chief's telling the story. I'm just writing the words down. Okay? In my life, I have witnessed the great wrongs of the human beings. I have witnessed the rise of the great cultures and the destruction of vast societies. He's telling you he's really old. You know? You don't know how old he is. But he's been around for a while because he's seen whole societies created and destroyed. Now, left in this awkward shell of my own humanity, it comes time for me to prepare myself for my journey home, to begin again amongst my people in the spirit world. He knows he's dying. And now that's telling you the purpose of the young boy is he's going to hear this story. And he is going to carry on this story, but you don't know quite where the young boy fits in yet. In this time for me to pass on the knowledge and the wisdom of the ancient ones, we, grandson, are the bearers of lost secrets, the keepers of the knowledge and the wisdom of the ancient fathers. So he's telling the child exactly what his purpose is. He is going to be the carrier of knowledge and wisdom. So he is more like a shaman. He is a holy man. But his holy is not medical or medicine. His is wisdom and intellectual knowledge. The old chief removes a stick from the fire, lighting the broken sage mix with sweet grass in the bowl at his feet. Inhaling deeply, he is consumed by a long silence. Now what I'm adding to the story is the atmosphere of the cave. If you've ever smelled sage, it's very poignant. It smells sort of like it's really robust in its scent, and sweetgrass is counter to that. The sweetgrass, it's kind of it gives you a mix. It's a pleasant smell. The boy watches as the smoke swirls upward, disappearing into the blackness of the cave beyond the firelight. Ghost spirits watch from above as the ritual begins. The old chief picks up the decorated skin from the ground beside where he sat before the fire. His crippled fingers manage to lace loose, and he removes a pipe, placing a bud of tobacco in it, and then lighting it. Taking the pipe in both hands, he gestures with his head bowed in respect, giving his blessing before extending it across the fire to his grandson. Take this pipe, inhale the herb, and let it be your commitment to the task bestowed upon us by the ancient ones. So the ritual is basically the lighting of an old pipe and the inhaling of tobacco, which by Native American standards is actually a very holy ritual. It is a cleansing ritual, actually. So the smoke is, when you inhale it into your body, is taking the imperfections out of your body. That's basically what it represents. The boy takes the pipe, feeling its stone textured, etched with ruins from a lost culture. He draws a deep breath and feels its warmth pass from the pipe into his lungs. The old chief chants, raising his hands upward. Destiny has been fulfilled. His chants diminish, settling to a smile upon the young boy, who offers the pipe back to his grandfather. With his gentle touch of a finger, the old chief nudges the pipe back at the boy. The pipe is yours, grandson. It is the first of many gifts of the Great Spirit that is passed to you. To smoke from this pipe you vow to protect the laws of nature and the secrets of the ancients. It is the pipe of truth. Chinupur is what it is called in the ancient tongue. Smoke from it with those you feel worthy and never allow it to pass from your possession. So basically what the old chief is doing is he's passing on to the next generation his possessions that he has protected all of the years of his life, and now it comes time for the new shaman of wisdom and knowledge to take on the responsibility of caring for these things. A cold chill blows through the cave, challenging the flames, but the flames will not fail, for the magic of the old chief is great. The old chief wraps an animal fur around his shoulders. He speaks proud, his voice bold, defying the unwanted spirit that has entered the cave, and he continues. In the old days before the first kings of men, there existed a land called Mu. It was a land not ruled by the powers of men, but by the nature from which all things flow in peace and harmony. The people of this land were descendants of a simple clan of wanderers that found content in this land and made it their home. They fished off the shallow bay for many generations before the foreigners came. The first of these foreigners were exiles from other lands escaping the tyranny of pharaohs and emperors. Here in this land of Mu, they found peace with them. They brought much knowledge and were able to build a great canal which extended to the northlands, bringing trade from the Mayan tribes. It is not an easy journey to reach Mu, since its location was a protected secret. The only passage to Mu from the south was through a guardian city of Atlantasia, and its only route was by sea. The tribal leaders from the original clans of Mu allowed the foreigners to settle, provided that the customs of the clansmen were never interfered with. As a tribute to the agreement and the foreigners, between the foreigners, built a temple. The temple took many years to build and became the center of what became the city of Mu, the motherland. The temple became a place of knowledge where scholars which came from the many lands beyond the sea to gather and share the knowledge of the cultures and methods of communication. Life was simple for the people in Mu. Each man could practice their own beliefs inside their home. A council was formed to deliberate conflicts, and even though the clansmen accepted the foreigners, they still kept pretty much to themselves in their own traditions and customs. Basically what this is doing is giving you an idea of what the life was like to live in that land at that time. It's very simple. There's no modern advancements. The land is pretty simple, laid out. It's ancient times. The timeline of the book is actually probably about 2,000 years before the birth of Christ. So it's a long time, and it does eventually work its way into modern times in the next books. There's 5 books to this series. The place called the Motherland became an attraction for the reverence of intellectual freedom, causing many of the visiting scholars to stay once they arrived. Many studied the native ways taught in the Temple of Ra. In the Temple of Ra, the knowledge was transcribed to scrolls by the priests of the temple. It is in these scrolls that the secrets of nature prevail, sponsoring a society of scholars that bore the symbol of union, which was expressed by two loops intersecting with a dot above and a dot below. Its concept being the study of earth, heaven, and humankind, which are the cosmic forces of Mu. The story I tell you, my grandson, is about the powers of the land and about the few chosen to guard the secrets. This is the story of Balatar. Now you know what the Balatar is. The Balatar is the organization or the group of people who are chosen by some intellectual, some ancient group of people to protect the wisdom and the secrets of nature and the law of nature. So that's the purpose of this chief, and he is passing on that purpose to his grandson. The old chief took his hand, his fingers twisted by age, circled the fire. The sparks and smoke began to swirl, and figures began to appear before the astonished child by his grandfather's magic. So it's basically giving you an idea that from this fire, the smoke inside there is the child is hearing the words, and the images are forming on the smoke, which is giving the reader the illusion of a story being told, and you start to see the different characters, and you start to see the actions, and what that's doing is setting up the reader to close your eyes, grandson, and see the journey of your people and accept it as your own. Be one with the universe, for it is you, grandson, that will be the link between man and spirit world. As a young boy is consumed by the images in the darkness of his mind, a simple truth reveals to him all roads to the future lead from the past. And that's the end of the prelude. Now, with this prelude, you have a storyteller. You have the person who is the recipient of the story. You have the mood of the story is being placed in the voice of Native American. So if you read the book and you take the voice of, this is an old chief. He is his speech pattern isn't fast. It's very, very slow paced. And if you take on that pace and you read the words as if it was the old man speaking throughout the book, that is the voice that I used in this book. Is not mine, but the voice of the chief, and I wrote it, the entire book, in the perspective that the chief is telling the story throughout the whole book. So I just I just write the words. The chief is telling you the story. It's kind of a strange way of looking at it, but I let my books are written by my imagination. Sometimes it's a storyline that I have, but the characters build themselves. The storylines, the inside storylines, it might be 5, 6 different storylines of different characters that are mixing and intermingling with each other. And then there is always that one storyline that's going through the entire book, which is the main storyline, and it may not appear to be the main storyline. By the time you get to the end of the book, you're starting to see all of the loose ends, all of the different stories that are being told within the book that are telling the story of the whole book, which is your main storyline, till you get to the final part of the book. And I could read you the end of the book, but that's sort of like the guy sitting in the back of the movie theater that's yelling, "Oh, watch this. This is a good part coming up." Have you ever watched that movie called The Blob, where that guy sitting in the back, when the Blob finally got him, everybody cheered because he was ruining the whole movie? To me, that's what it's like reading the end of the book first. I like a surprise at the end of the book. This one here is very dramatic at the end. I've actually had a couple people who have read the book that said that it was very emotional to them to learn the how to say the secret of the book. The whole concept of the book was the chief. It was a story about the chief. So I got other books here, and they're not so dramatic. I mean, you got this one, The Battle of the Minutemen. Okay, book number 1. The first paragraph starts off: awakening to the clamor of the rabble outside his window, Malachi yelled down to his neighbor John Wilson, "What is happening?" That leads right into the action of the story. John looked up at Malachi and could see the seriousness in his and Malachi could see the seriousness in his face. Shouted back, "A large force of regulars are marching out of Boston." There you go. The Battle of Lexington. But they're not in Lexington. They're in the suburbs of Boston, in a place called Medfield. Medfield was probably maybe about 15-20 minutes if you were driving by car. It's more like about an hour if you were walking. So how I started the book, where I didn't want to be like everybody else. Oh, well, the Battle of Lexington, and they lined up and you had the British overthrow them. I wanted to show that there was more depth to the Battle of Lexington and Concord and the siege of Boston than what the history books give you. I didn't want it to be I wanted it to be a history lesson, but I wanted it to be an entertaining history lesson. So you learn a lot of things that you don't read in history books, and a lot of the books that are written about the Revolutionary War are always written from the perspective of Congress. Who cares about what Congress did? They didn't do nothing. All they did was pass laws and resolution. The people who were actually out there on the battlefield were the people who made the most sacrifice, and they should be written about. Their story needs to be told. The Battle of Lexington and Concord, there was a lot of detail. And the one thing that I always wondered was, where were our leaders? Where was John Hancock? Where was John Adams? Where was Samuel Adams? Where was George Washington? But anyway, the show is about to come to an end. We're down to our last minute. If you would like to be an author, if you would like to be on the show, you can go to marcocommunications.com, which is right below there, and it has all the information on how to contact us. If you have a book and are serious and would like to be on our show, all you have to do is give us a call. If you would like to advertise or sponsor our show, you can also contact us for that too. we are going to say goodnight. And it's been a great show, and I hope you learned something. So, see you next week.